Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 104 of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. If you are a regular here, you know we are in that season where my annual Pranayama Yoga teacher training is about to begin for 2022. And every year when this happens, I do a month-long Pranayama focused set of episodes on the podcast, mainly to pique your interest about Pranayama. But also to give you a glimpse into the vast potential of pranayama practice, right? And what studying pranayama is really all about. Many yoga teachers and students think that pranayama is this boring, dull thing that we have to do in yoga. But honestly, the opposite is true. If anything, I would think that pranayama is deeply fascinating, okay? And it is wildly interesting and it is so easy to learn and apply. And usually we end up having ideas and notions about how boring something is when we have just half knowledge or very little or no knowledge about something. Okay. And we end up judging it through too soon. So when you join my program, which starts on November 4th, which is literally around the corner, depending on when you're listening to this episode, we'll be nerding out about so many things in pranayama, okay? And this happens every year. But before I begin today's episode, I just want to remind you that this is a time-sensitive announcement. November 4th is literally around the corner. As I'm recording this, we are well into the third week of October. So you have less than 2 weeks to be part of this program, okay? It happens once a year. The next one is sometime in 2023, end of 2023. So please don't wait a whole year to work on your breath. Think of the impact that this will create for you in your own life, in your own practice. And for those of you who teach, the impact and potential this can have in your students' lives, okay? The training is completely online. Okay. And it is 6 weeks long. It starts on November 4th and it happens for 6 Fridays, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific time. And these are live, but for some reason, if you cannot attend live, these are recorded and will be uploaded as well. You also have a content library for smarter, quicker recap. You have done for you pranayama sequences that you can take and practice at home. You also have a detailed manual. Every week you get a different mini manual to work with. And you also have like a checklist that will help you stay on track, as well as a few alumni sessions once the actual live training is over and you take what you've learned and start to implement it. And then we circle back a few times to make sure that what you have learned, you're actually able to put into practice. So remember, this starts on November 4th, 2022, and you can sign up by going to letstalk.yoga. That's letstalk.yoga. Go to the study with me section and you should be able to sign up in no time. And again, even if you are not interested in doing the training, stick around for these pranayama episodes because you will get so much value from these conversations. I'll see you on the other side. For episode 102 and 103, I have been already talking about pranayama. In episode 102, I gave you a deep dive into signs that you are ready to study pranayama, or for those of you who teach, signs that you are ready to teach pranayama. That's episode 102. Make sure you go listen to that one after this. And episode 103, which was a shorter one, was where does pranayama actually begin? Now this, in episode 104, we are going to go into a conversation. Think of this as a masterclass about how much pranayama do you really need? Okay. How much pranayama do you really need? How do we measure the quantity of pranayama in our lives, right? Is there an ideal amount? Is there something like too much pranayama in our practice? These are just some of the questions I will be getting into in today's conversation. But make sure that you keep listening to these pranayama podcasts because they will give you a deep understanding of what pranayama actually is. Okay. Now, before we start today's conversation about how much pranayama do you really need, let's first take a step back. Okay. And let's explore the 4 parts of respiration. Okay. The 4 parts of respiration. Now, these 4 parts are Puraka, Antara Kumbhaka, Richaka, and Bahir or Bahya Kumbhaka. Okay. Puraka is inhalation. Antara Kumbhaka is internal retention. Richaka is exhalation. Bahir or Bahya Kumbhaka is external retention. Usually, when we think of breathing, we think of inhale deeply, exhale deeply. And we don't really often think of the pauses that are a part of our respiratory system. Okay. Now, in the training itself, we'll be doing a deep dive into each component of your respiratory cycle and the impact and significance it has on our bodies and on our minds. But know that in pranayama, we pay attention to all 4 parts of the breath. Okay. Inhalation, internal retention, exhalation, and external retention. And most often what happens is we just end up jumping to, when we think of our breath, we think our breath needs to be deep and long. And while that's a very narrow view of just understanding the breath, okay, we want to dive into each individual component of your breath, okay? And when you really understand just all things inhalation, all things internal retention, all things exhalation, all things external retention, then you have set your foundation to learn pranayama techniques, okay? Because it's not just about inhalation and exhalation. There is more to pranayama than that, okay? You want to develop an intimate relationship with your breath, okay? A really intimate relationship with your breath, not so much in theory. That's necessary and required, especially if you teach yoga, but more in terms of just embodiment and experiencing it in your own practice. Okay. So there are many different techniques in pranayama, and some of them leverage the inhalations, some of them leverage the exhalations, some of them leverage the retentions. So knowing each component of your breath is something that we'll get into in the November training. But just know that there are 4 parts to respiration that we pay attention to in pranayama. Okay. Now that you know the 4 parts of respiration, it's time to move to part 2. Okay, of this conversation. And that is understanding that there are different groups or different types of pranayamas. Okay, there are different groups or different types of pranayama. Right here is the key to understanding what and how much pranayama you need in your life. Okay, while we will be doing a deep exploration in the training on November 4th itself, this is your foundation. Understanding the 4 different groups or types of pranayama practices. So if you are multitasking, come back to me, because even if you do or don't do the training, okay, rather more like you don't do the training in November, this will be really valuable to you. Pranayama practice is organized into 4 different groups. Pranayama practice is organized into 4 different groups. These groups are breath attention and awareness practices, balancing pranayamas, vitalizing pranayamas, and tranquilizing pranayamas. Once again, the 4 groups of pranayama practices are breath attention and awareness practices, balancing pranayama, tranquilizing pranayama, and vitalizing pranayama. Okay. Think of the first one, breath awareness and breath attention practices, as kindergarten. Without knowing your breath in a certain way, it isn't possible to go deeper into pranayama. So stage 1 or group 1 of pranayama practices is learning and understanding breath attention techniques and then moving into breath awareness techniques given to us by yogis who have tried and tested these for centuries. Okay, they absolutely work and they become a foundation. In fact, they lay the perfect foundation for you to go into deeper pranayama practices eventually. And in the training, we'll be really exploring the difference between breath attention and breath awareness and practices between the two, because attention is an act of the mind, whereas awareness is an act of the body. Okay. And really refining and fine-tuning our awareness with the breath before we go deeper into pranayama. Okay. Again, we'll be exploring what comes under this group in the training itself. The next group of pranayama practices is called balancing pranayamas. Think of this as the oldest pranayama known to mankind, and balancing pranayama brings our polarities into balance. Think of it as our masculine and feminine energies, our Shiva and Shakti parts of our existence, the solar and lunar parts of our being, the sympathetic and parasympathetic states of our nervous system, and then so much more. If there is one pranayama you learn beyond breath awareness techniques, it should be this balancing pranayama. Okay. Again, while we will go deep into the training and explore the stages in this balancing pranayama, remember that if you start with breath awareness practices and then you move to balancing pranayamas, these two are your foundations. You cannot skip these two in your pranayama practices. So you don't want to jump to some techniques before you have mastered breath awareness and balancing pranayamas. That's really crucial for you to understand here. Okay. Once you've done breath awareness techniques and balancing pranayamas, then you move to learning vitalizing and tranquilizing pranayamas. So let's start by understanding what is tranquilizing pranayamas. Tranquilizing pranayamas are a group of techniques, a group of pranayama techniques that help us connect with our parasympathetic nervous system more easily. Okay. These practices usually induce a sense of cooling and calming nature, okay, over our body and over our minds. There are more than a handful number of techniques that are valuable here, and they can be used in different contexts. They can be used to address different situations and different needs of practitioners. But the main goal for a tranquilizing pranayama is to move us from a sympathetic state to a parasympathetic state, okay? And they can be used at different times of the day. They can be used in different proportions. There are some techniques that you pick for certain needs over others. The beauty of this category is that there are very little contraindications. And by contraindications, I mean the list of people who shouldn't be doing this for whatever reason. Okay. And it's largely universally applicable, though we'll be exploring contraindications for each group in the training itself. Know that you've now done breath awareness practices, balancing practices, then you learn tranquilizing pranayamas. Okay. And then let's wrap up these groups of pranayama with understanding vitalizing pranayama. Okay. Now, vitalizing pranayamas are in many ways the opposite of tranquilizing pranayamas. They are more stimulating. Okay. In a sense, these pranayamas induce a state of heat within the body. Okay. They stimulate, or they are meant to stimulate us out of a tamasic state. Okay. And it's okay if some of these terms are not immediately ringing a bell for you. We'll be discussing them in the training itself. But the thing with vitalizing pranayamas is they need good training and practice, and you need a teacher to lead you through these, because too much heat in the body can actually be harmful to some people more than others. So essentially learning the stages in heating pranayamas or vitalizing pranayamas and learning when to do them, when to hold back, how much of them to do is something we'll be looking at. Okay. This group of pranayamas should be learned after the other three have been learned and practiced and understood. Okay. This vitalizing group has some strong contraindications that we'll be looking at. They're not as universally applicable as some of the other practices in pranayama. So we'll be doing a deep dive into that in the training as well. So now let's get to the main question in this podcast, right? How much pranayama should you be doing? The short answer is there isn't a direct answer to this question. You have to take these three things into consideration before arriving at your answer. Firstly, the maturation of the practitioner in question. Right? Now, this can really make or break pranayama for you. Sometimes we end up arriving at a particular pranayama technique before we are actually primed and ready for it. Okay. And there ends up being a gap between the practice and the practitioner. So make sure that, when you arrive at pranayama, you have moved in these stages. So that way you are ready for success and you can really absorb what is being, taught to you. Okay. And for those of you who teach, this is very significant for you to understand, because sometimes you will have students who arrive for pranayama but aren't necessarily ready for it. And how do you prepare them for pranayama is something we'll get into the training as well. Okay. The second part to this is the experience and caliber of the yoga teacher itself. Think of this as a corporate job at some level, teaching yoga. Okay. Right. And as you grow, as your experience grows, you tend to grow. And remember that as yoga teachers, sometimes we think that we should know everything, and we forget the role of time and consistency and practice and mentorship and really just embodying the practice itself. So just remember, what matters in your pranayama journey, how much pranayama you can really imbibe, depends on the caliber of your teacher as well. Okay. And lastly, the stage of life that you are in and will dictate what type of pranayama you need and how much time of pranayama you need as well. Okay. It's a conversation we'll be exploring in the training that starts on November 4th. Okay. So essentially, you can't come up with a black and white answer as to you need to do 10 minutes of pranayama 5 times a week or 2 times a week. There is no such prescription. Okay. A lot of meditation apps out there today will tell you that you can sit down and breathe for 2 minutes and 3 minutes and 1 minute and 10 minutes. But really, it's pranayama is not meant to be done like that. Okay. And if you want to develop a clear, deep, refined, structured understanding, a high quality understanding of pranayama, then my 30-hour pranayama yoga teacher training is your answer. Okay. I get emails every year after the training is over and people asking to get in. So just remember that it starts on November 4th. Think of it as you and me nerding out about pranayama for 6 weeks, every Friday, 2 hours. It gets over before you know it, and it will have tremendous impact in your understanding of pranayama and, more importantly, your application of pranayama. Okay. So again, all the details are at letstalk.yoga. Again, remember, time is running out. I hope to see you in the training. I will be back with some more pranayama goodness next week. Until then, take care. Enjoy your practice. Bye-bye.